Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruchita Sinha, and I am a director with GE Ventures. GE Ventures is the venture capital arm of GE. We invest about 100 to 150 million on an annual basis in healthcare, energy, software, and advanced manufacturing. We currently have about close to $1 billion under management. Within healthcare, we invest in medical devices, precision medicine, and digital health. We currently have 3 wearable companies in our portfolio, one for cerebral blood flow, one for intracranial blood pressure, and the third one is Chronotherapeutics, which is a very novel way of drug delivery. And so clearly, we're very bullish on this market. Today, on our panel, we have Tracy, who you just heard, and we also have Parrick Ruane from Chronotherapeutics, and Jose Bohorquez from Skulpt. And I'll actually let you guys introduce yourselves. And also provide some background about your companies.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jose Bohorquez. I'm co-founder and CEO of Skulpt. We're a San Francisco-based startup. Developed some technology that came out of Harvard Med School to quantify people's muscle health and fitness by measuring the muscle quality and then also the percentage of fat in any part of their body. So people who are into fitness, who are trying to reach specific goals, can now have a lot more insight into their bodies and get feedback on how to target specific, how to do specific exercises, nutrition, and that sort of thing to reach their goals with that new insight that hasn't been gathered before.
Hi, my name is Parrick Ruane. I'm head of R&D over at Chronotherapeutics, and we're developing a wearable for smoking cessation. And I agree with everything Tracy said during her talk. I think wearables, it's evolving into something new, and I hope that our company, Chrono, is at the forefront of that. Let me give kind of a bit of background on the company and tell you why our wearable is quite different than anything that's out there. If you consider that on planet Earth, there's about 1 billion people that smoke, and it's pretty clear that 2 of the most preventable medical problems we have are smoking-related illnesses and obesity. So we decided to tackle smoking cessation. You may not know this, but 1/3 of all smokers smoke their first cigarette in the first 5 minutes of waking up. It's pretty disgusting, but it's true. By the way, I'm an ex-smoker. 2/3 smoke the first cigarette in the first half hour. But the therapeutics that are out there, probably the best one at the moment is the nicotine patch, but it's pretty obvious. You have to put that patch on when you wake up. It takes about 2 or 3 hours before the nicotine gets in your blood, so you still have those cravings. What we do at Chronotherapeutics is we have a wearable that you place onto your body before you go to bed. It has a screen, and you key in what time you typically wake up. Let's say that's in Silicon Valley, it's usually 6 a.m. for most of us. The software then controls the device. The device has the drug nicotine in it, and it starts delivering it an hour, 2 hours before you wake up. So for those smokers that are trying to quit, they're going to have nicotine in their blood. This is very important to get rid of the cravings that they typically have to deal with, and that's why they don't quit, because they just can't deal with the cravings. So we consider that smart drug delivery. We're in NDA. We're regulated as a drug. I was at the FDA recently, so it's going to be. We're not going to be putting a Fitbit out in 3 months. This is going to take a few years to get done. The other thing I'd like to say about the technology is it has compliance tracking sensors, which is very important for payers, and it also has Bluetooth technology. This product will only be sold to people who have smartphones or smartwatches. So the Bluetooth communicates to the phone to the cloud, and with anything that's addictive in nature, like nicotine, which is very addictive, you need behavioral support. So you can include your friends and family, Facebook, Twitter, whatever. But those 3 things together with smart drug delivery, compliance tracking, and behavioral support, we think we can put a real effective tool into smokers' hands so they can combat big tobacco and just get rid of this scourge once and for all.
And I think I got my introduction, so I'll bypass so that we can get into questions.
Thank you. So there's been a lot of mixed market sentiment about the wearables market, right? So there is a camp that says The technology is not there. There are integration and meaning issues. What insights is the data providing? There is the camp that says the market is worth $50 billion. And you look at Fitbit just filed for an IPO. You look at the S1 filings, $750 million in revenues, 200 adjusted EBITDA. They've shipped 21 million units. That's real. I mean, it's real money right there, right? So I'd love to get your thoughts on what do you think are the gaps in the market? Are you bullish? Are you bearish? What do you think needs to happen to change the game here? Jose, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, so first off, I like to think of it more than wearables as a digital health and fitness sort of revolution, because when you look at the wearable space, it's really been restricted to the wrist primarily, a little bit with glasses maybe or smart clothing, but really the advent of technology in a person's home that they can interact with much more regularly and that creates this wealth of data goes well beyond something that can be worn in the body. So, for example, with our technology, it's not worn. It's used. The use model is much more like a scale. You might use it once a day, or a couple of times a day, or a couple of times a week. But now you're able to get this insight about your body that you just could never get before. And going into the next question or the previous topic on actionability and connectivity of the data, I think it's just a matter of time. This is a very young space and market. People are still figuring out a lot of really interesting sensors that are going to capture data that was never captured before. And there's a lot of power in the fact that you're now able to capture data much more regularly than you have been in the past. So when people talk about it, just imagine if diabetics only got their glucose level measured when they went to the doctor, every couple of months, rather than checking it on a daily basis, you would just miss so much. And the extension of that example would be where it's continuously monitored, but there are many other things that people today only measure very irregularly, and so you miss a lot of the insight. So I think I am bullish on the space in general of digital health and fitness, connected health and fitness, all of the big data that's going to come from that, all of the insights that are going to come from combining, your sleep data from your activity data with your emotional data, with your muscular data, with your body composition, nutrition. There's just so much information that wasn't there just a couple of years ago, and you're seeing a lot of the big platform players trying to create that connectivity. Apple with Apple Health Kit, Google Fit, Samsung. Under Armour has been on a buying binge, buying 3 companies in the last year for more than $500 million to be a platform to capture all of that data. So I think the most exciting stuff is actually ahead of us.
Patrick?
Yeah, there's not much more to add. I agree with that. Obviously, anyone sitting up here is bullish on wearables. From, I guess, my community, that I've come from like a medical device, drug, combination medical device background. Most people, when I go back and talk to them about wearables, yeah, they say it's bullshit. That's what they tell me when I sit down to lunch with them. And there's not much of an argument I can give back to them at the moment, because I understand their perspective. I think we have to have some wins. We need wearables that actually make your life better, make it easier. If we don't do that, yeah, I think it's fluff, it'll go away. But I believe we are going to deliver on that. And there's many companies I'm aware of that are trying to, do drug delivery and do diagnostics, and that's the future.
So Tracy, you clearly have a lot of experience in the space. Does wearables have to be a hardware play? And there is Google and Samsung, but from a startup perspective, right? What are the software applications? How do entrepreneurs think about becoming a wearables company if they don't have hardware experience?
I think it's a little bit of what Jose was saying about it kind of moving beyond the wrist. And my take is that the future of wearables, they won't be worn. We're going to have sensors and sensing technology, which really is kind of what is the game changer, so to speak. And those are just going to be embedded into the environment. And it's not going to be something you notice. It's not going to be something you put on. It's not going to be something you have to think about. It's just there. And we see some of that already. There are some clinical trials with Parkinson's patients where there are sensors around the home, and that's how clinical sites are being able to track kind of some of the habits and so forth of some of the patients in those trials. And I think when you talk about the software piece of it, I mean, that's kind of the big part, because it doesn't necessarily physically need to be something that you're putting on. It's not necessarily the hardware.
Yeah, and Jose and Parrick, how much time do you guys spend thinking about the hardware design versus the software?
I can tell you, because we're FDA regulated, we spend a lot of time on the software. That's a big challenge for us. Once you get a product on the market, if your software is controlling anything, for example, drug delivery, you can't make a change to that software after, well, you can, but you've got to go back and run a clinical trial and refile with the FDA. You won't have a business. So this is kind of new to me. It's enormous. The hardware, that's more plug and play. We pay particular attention to our industrial design. We do understand that a wearable has to be personal, but I would say we spend much more time worrying and working on the software.
Jose?
Ultimately, it's an overall system, and you really have to worry about both, because there's a trade-off between how easy is it for the person to incorporate it into their life, and then how much value is that information giving them. So, if it's very easy, then the information doesn't have to be quite as powerful, and if it's a pain, then it has to be much more valuable for engagement to keep up. So you have to do both, and to the earlier conversation by Tracy on the actionability of the data, you have to continuously add value to that. And some of that comes up front, with activity trackers, for example, which has been sort of the trailblazer in the digital health and fitness space. It's not, it's that a lot of the value is captured very quickly. I think the fact that 50% of users, and I've heard numbers as high as 90 or 95% of users stop using it after a year, it doesn't mean that they didn't get a lot of value out of it. A lot of times what happens is you capture a lot of that insight very quickly, and then you simply don't need it anymore, which doesn't mean you didn't provide a lot of value to that customer. It just means that it's a challenge to have them remain engaged. So to a company, there's a lot of effort that goes into the hardware and making sure that it's part of an experience that's enjoyable or easy and gives a lot of value. But really, for the purposes of long-term retention and capturing as much value from those customers, you also have to provide great software, a great experience, great insight. So that's the part. Unfortunately, if you're not in a regulated environment, you can iterate on that and continuously improve it with the feedback of your customers.
Yeah, that's a good point, and kind of leads me to my next question of the regulatory path, right? So I think when you're an entrepreneur in the wearable space, you spend a lot of time thinking about, should I be a consumer-only device? Should I go down the clinical route? If so, which one? Do I go for a 510K or, God forbid, a PMA? Where should I go? What does that mean from a time to market and a business model perspective, right? So you have, I think the bulk of the wearables out there are obviously consumer focused. You do have the Alive cores and the iRhythms that are 510K approved. And then there is Chrono, which is a completely different path, right? So I'd love to hear from you guys, Jose and Parrick. How did you guys think about, do I want to be consumer focused? Do I want to completely avoid the FDA? Or, that's my primary route?
Maybe I'll take that in the beginning. I think we approach it differently because we wanted to develop a technology to deliver drug and to deliver it transdermally. So the minute you hear drug, 510K it doesn't even exist. And in fact, it's a drug and it's a medical device, but because the primary mode of action is drug delivery, that takes PMA out. So it has to be an NDA, so it's regulated by CDER, which is the drug wing of the FDA. For us, we could have chosen one of 20 different drugs to go after. The decision to use nicotine was made because that would be the easiest regulatory path. So within the NDA umbrella of paths you can go, there's something called a 505(b)(2), and that's where there's a history and you can reference all the toxicological information that's in the literature and with other products. So there's a lot known about nicotine, and in order for us to get approved, we have to show relative bioequivalence to a predicate product. So it's a little bit like a 510K. It's a 3 to 4 year path. It's not a 7 or 15 year, and it's not 150 million. So it's somewhere in between. But the decision was kind of made for us. We just had to choose which drug. I would say if you're doing wearables in a drug, don't do drug discovery. You're not going to make it.
And Jose, you guys ended up selecting the consumer route. How did you get to that decision, and how do you think about downstream potentially the clinical route?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a winding road, frankly. The technology, my co-founder is a professor of neurology at Harvard Medical School, began developing the core technology more than 12, 13 years ago because he had patients with neuromuscular disorders. And believe it or not, even in the clinical space, there aren't really good technologies for quantifying muscle health and fitness. There, of course, the focus being more on health. And so a lot of our early research was more medically oriented. He's got more than 30 peer-reviewed publications. We've done clinical trials in a variety of neuromuscular disorders because a lot of our initial funding actually came from the National Institute of Health. So we're in this interesting situation where we have more clinical data than a lot of medical device companies, and yet when we looked at the business opportunities, it just made more sense to go after the consumer market where it's a much larger market, it's a much faster time to market. So long as your claims are adequate and you're solving a problem that's not specifically disease related, I presented an opportunity to get there. So it's one of those things where you have a technology that has a lot of different applications, and you just have to, I think, in a case-by-case basis, judge the risk and the reward and the opportunities and all of that. For us, it just made a lot of sense to go for the consumer market and to not go after claims that were more medically related.
Can I just add one thing I should have said? Even though we're being regulated by the FDA, we still consider ourselves a consumer product. Interestingly, when we contacted the FDA, first of all, they told us you will be regulated by the Office of Over-the-Counter. So we are an OTC consumer product.
But the other part of that, because we advise a lot of clients in the digital health space on these exact issues, and it's not as clear-cut, obviously, as we've heard, but one thing is to Jose's point, I think, even if it's a consumer-centric device, as we talk about with the wearables, the Fitbits and Apple Watches and so forth, that physicians don't see that as valid information because it's not clinical grade. And you don't necessarily, I don't think, need an FDA clearance or approval for that, but you need clinical trials, you need something to back it up, because when you have a consumer that's going to take this and go into their physician and say, okay, what do I do now, or what do I do with this, the physician has to feel like that information is accurate. And that doesn't mean necessarily an FDA stamp, but it could mean that there's the data and the clinical trials to back it up.
Great. So we'd like to wrap up the discussion with one final question. So we have a room full of entrepreneurs, and so what is the one piece of advice each one of you would give to an entrepreneur who already has a wearables company or who is thinking of getting into the wearables space?
Sure. Well, you asked a question about can you create a product, or can you build a company around sort of the wearables or the connected health and fitness without building hardware? And I think a lot of companies out there are making the mistake of building hardware that they don't need to build. And you're seeing now with the Apple Watch and with Samsung and with like all of these products coming out there that have a host of sensors, there's a lot of value that can be extracted without building your own hardware. Hardware is hard. I just take my hat off to what you guys are doing, hardware, software, medical, drug, like that's incredibly challenging, I imagine. But just focus on what is the problem that you're trying to solve and how can you get there and what can you leverage that's already existing and add value on top of that if that's a possibility. If you're building a brand new type of sensor technology that just doesn't exist, then that's not a possibility, so you go the hard way.
I guess one complaint I hear about wearables a lot is they're not very reliable. And personally, when I've used them, they don't really do what they're supposed to do all the time. So I would advise people, whether you're forced to by regulators, do it under design control to some degree. Do verification testing, do validation, and make sure what you put out in the market really does what you say it's going to do, because you might make a little bit of money in the beginning, but you will not have an impact. And we should all be here to make impacts, not to get exits. That's my opinion.
And I agree with both of what they said, but also, as I mentioned, find a gap to close. Create the innovation, find the innovation within one of those gaps. And one of the things is, even if you take something like a Fitbit, connectivity. Make sure if you have a wearable that's just going to be more consumer-centric, lifestyle fitness, it needs to connect into things to at least have a chance to make an impact.
Thank you. So we have a few questions here that unfortunately we weren't able to get to, but we will be around if folks want to come up and chat. With that, please join me in thanking our panelists.